This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoop. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
We're going around this great state. We're talking to people who know how things work and people who are making a difference. It's my great pleasure to introduce to the wider audience here in Ohio, Mayor Don Plusquellic of Akron. And I have to tell you, Mayor, that when I go around Ohio and I talk to communities, what I say is, you need to get 2 or 3 buses and go to Akron. A few months ago, I was speaking for the Dayton Rotary Club, and that's exactly what I said. Get 2 or 3 buses, go to Akron, find out what they're doing right, bottle it, bring it home, and then do it. And so the question for you is, first of all, what is Akron doing right here that you should be a dying Rust Belt community, and you're not? Why?
Well, I think there's several answers to that, and I always lead with great mayoral leadership.
Right.
But
well, no,
for your viewers, that's a joke.
I will agree.
But
you had 2 great predecessors too.
I think it makes a difference when you have someone who makes a commitment to stay on a job and be held accountable. I think that I have had the good fortune of coming into this system with a tradition, especially on city council, of dealing with issues and looking at the future and understanding investment and understanding that we should be looking and building for the future rather than our own little political ambitions and our own little, tell me what I can do today to get elected, to tell people what they need to hear, and that'll get me elected again, and then I don't see anything past then, it's just the next election. And I can't take credit for that tradition. I think many of us have helped continue that tradition. But that was here, and I can't tell you except that John S. Knight started the Knight newspaper chain here.
Okay.
I only met John one time. It was in passing, so I don't know him, didn't know him personally. But he was such a strong figure here to sort of demand that Akron, Ohio was going to do things right.
Okay.
And if I look at the difference between the city of Akron and maybe some other places, I think John probably had an influence. And then there were good people that I came into council and continued sort of that tradition of doing things right on city council.
Yeah.
And I think every 2 years,
Yeah.
there's a chance for this city to go wrong and fall back into the trap of other cities of doing battle on little things that mean nothing, but without looking at the big picture. There is another factor, which is very important, and that is we were not a steel city.
Okay.
And it's not to take away from Canton or Youngstown or Cleveland and their great history, but in a way we were fortunate because we had an industry. While people would describe that, as you did, an old Rust Belt industry, the tire industry, making large amounts.
Automobile-centered.
Automobile-centered, but not steel. And so when the world changed, just our world as it related to the United States and where tires were made, it didn't make any sense at all. Forget any of the other problems to have every tire made in Ohio, in Akron, and shipped to the rest of the country.
Okay.
So companies, as people moved, I always blame it on the SOB that invented the air conditioning units.
Okay.
Because Florida really wasn't a great place to stay for 6 months out of the year without air conditioning. Neither was Mississippi or Alabama. But once people started migrating there and out west, people built factories, all kinds of factories, to accommodate that growth and that. So we started to see the rubber industry leave, much the same as steel, but the difference was, as a seed falling off a dying tree, we had the polymer industry.
Yes. So
and that's a major difference.
Now, here's the thing, and I've spoken to the good folks of Dayton about this, is that Dayton had a chance with the NCR, they had a chance there to grab the brass ring, electronic cash registers, and then become, if you will, the logistics center of America and then the world. For example, Acosta, which manages the little barcodes on the back of all those little things you go into your Kroger's or wherever you go to buy groceries, that's 32,000 employees. So you see what I'm saying? That's the same size as Wright Pat. And so you folks here made that transition from rubber to its first cousin, polymer. Okay. Why? What happened here?
Well, first of all, the beginning of that process was as a result of a crisis, and our federal government stepped in and required the 4 major rubber companies, they required them, they mandated. And it was wartime, so people tended to work together more cooperatively, but they shared research at the University of Akron.
Oh, okay.
And there's a plaque up there today at the Polymer, outside the Polymer Center, recognizing that historical date and factor that entered into a lot of research that really jump-started the polymer industry now. So where we sit here at City Hall, within a 50-mile radius, there are over 400, somewhere maybe 430, 440 polymer companies making products, manufacturing, out of something that is taken out of the earth now rather than grown in Africa and South America.
So you know a lot about the city of Akron and everything. I assume you're a native. You were born. How'd you fetch up to becoming mayor?
By accident and almost against my will, believe it or not.
You sound like Teddy Roosevelt in that regard, then.
No, I have a high regard for Teddy Roosevelt and guys like Truman, the real troopers out there who took it on as their duty. But I was a council person as a result of coming back after finishing a football career too soon. I wanted to play for the Browns.
Okay.
But I had a lot of support from the community, and I felt guilty, so I ran for a ward council position to help my little area of Akron, Kenmore, get some more police and build some parks for the kids, and ended up staying in. My dad was a rubber worker, like the vast majority of people here in Akron. No political connection, didn't really know anyone, and came in and thought I was doing my civic duty that they used to teach actually in high school, that we all have a responsibility in democracy to do something. Thought I was doing that, thought in my first interview, still remember the person who did the first interview. I said I'm going to serve 6 or 8 years and then get out because I had no real interest in being long-term. What I found, part of the reason that I said that was, and it's much worse today, at least in the public's mind, but I didn't trust anybody in the system, you know? I thought they were all politicians.
Right.
I got in, and I would venture to say that 11 out of 13, at least at that time, of the council members that served.
Good, decent, caring
just
people.
regular, decent people trying to do a job under unbelievably tough circumstances. The appetite, the public's appetite for your time, just your time alone, is insatiable. You can't ever go to enough meetings, go to enough banquets, partly because they have them on the same nights.
You can't go to the grocery store without being on and taking with you a notebook to take down what everybody brings to you as their concern for the moment.
And that literally happened to me last Saturday. I spent an hour and a half in a grocery store that should have taken me about a half hour.
Right.
But the thing is, I found that these were good people, and I enjoyed the process, the camaraderie in a way. You know, an old football guy, you're on a team. You go in the locker room, you go two-a-day practices. It's kind of like going through, you know, any other difficult time. When you come out of that, you feel better. These were difficult times back then. The rubber industries, the companies were leaving. I enjoyed it and ended up becoming president of council. When Tom Sawyer became mayor, when he was sworn in, I won't use the language because I tend to have a little flavorful vocabulary that even my mother still complains about. My 87-year-old mother. But I basically said to him, if you die in office, I will do something to your grave. And the point was, I don't want to be mayor.
Right.
I was practicing law, and lo and behold, John Seiberling announces retirement, Tom Sawyer runs and is elected, and I've got this choice. And I absolutely, without any question, thought seriously.
Hesitated.
To say, let me step out of the president, let somebody else take it. And I thought, no, I'll do it. And I think 4 months later, as one of my staff members described it, I said to myself, this is what I apparently always wanted to be. I just didn't know it. And so here we are, over 27 years later.
Wow.
This is my 28th year, 41st year in city government.
Okay.
So I came here to the job believing that I had a duty. I was in the position. I had 13 years of experience. We had a tough job ahead of us.
Yeah.
we first started doing exit interviews. And it's interesting, like a lot of different industry folks might do in their own business. When you lose a series of customers, you might want to send somebody out saying, hey, why did you leave us?
Exactly.
Why did you go with the Smith Company instead of our Brown
You're
Company?
it's almost more important than the actual hiring process, find out why people leave, yeah.
And that's what we did with businesses.
Yeah.
And we found out, by and large, we did 2 of these in terms of the city at large and then downtown. We found out that most companies that left were not mad at the mayor or the councilman or bad services. They were prosperous and they needed to expand. And the left were 98% built out in the city of Akron, like most northern industrial older cities.
Is that when you started going to the JEDs?
Well, we started with first doing land banking and doing industrial parks. So we immediately had land available.
Okay.
Then the next thing was to say, we need to keep annexing, but hey, you know what? We're willing to do a joint venture like private companies do.
Yeah.
And that's how I got the idea that this is really a joint venture. What the JEDs, what the townships brought was open vacant land.
Yeah.
And it was the path that businesses took because it was an easier one. No environmental problems.
Yeah.
And they have 20 acres and they have room for expansion. So we did the JEDs jointly together, getting the legislature to understand the concept and then moving forward. And so the other one was the downtown exit interviews, and most of those were involved with companies that just had difficulty getting or keeping employees because they said our employees, and it's a strange way that it aligned with Mary Means, who's an expert in downtown, that the chamber brought in.
I've heard of her.
She's really good and knows her business. But the employees complained because they I mean, this thing sounds
Bizarre.
minuscule in terms of the big picture.
Petty.
But they said they didn't have enough choices for lunch, that they got tired of going to the same restaurant. But it all builds on itself. And Mary Means said, and the terminology I know specifically because when I came in here in 1974, it was the terminology that they used, and that is, it's a central business district. Well, central business districts are what we have at Cascade. Big tower buildings, nothing connected, pushed back away from the street, and there's no real activity. And by the way, everybody leaves the central business district at 5. What you need is the old-fashioned downtown. You have to bring people down. You have to have people on the sidewalk. These skywalks are a bad investment that we made because we took people off the sidewalk.
Streets.
So we started
Crowded streets are safe streets.
and it's true. If you see 30 people on a street coming to a baseball game now at any snapshot time for any minute and a half to walk across, you'll see a wide range of people. You might still have a guy who's begging for money, and you might see 3 cops. But when you take the other 20-some people off the street and you see a beggar, maybe 2 beggars, and 3 cops, that's all you see on the street. You think that's not the place I should be. And that's the other part of it. People felt like they weren't safe, that this wasn't a safe place. And you only make things safe, not by lining the streets with the extra 100 cops, because when you go into a place and you see 20 cops lined up, you assume there's something bad going on, and you go the other way. And it's a strange psychological...
Why are they all here? What am I walking into?
What am I going to do?
Yeah.
But you need regular people coming down for a good reason, and the ballpark put us over the edge over the top.
Yeah. Let me ask you then something. One of the segments we have in here is called myth busting, where everybody believes something is true, but in reality it's not. And there's still, for example, there's still a flat Earth society out there. Who still believe it's all just this Columbus was a myth. So what can you tell us is your myth you'd like to have punctured here today?
And I don't think there's anything that's more important in our society than to know the truth about where we stand as it relates to taxation.
Okay.
And the truth is, if you measure it in the only way you can, because without trying to figure out tax rates, and some people, certain political party, hammer you on tax rates, but when corporations pay 0 taxes, that's not exactly the effective real tax rate. But if you measure it in percentage of gross domestic product, which is the only way to measure it, because somebody has an income tax, somebody has a property tax, somebody taxes on cigarettes, somebody has a VAT tax, value-added tax. However you tax, and you can argue that till you're blue in the face till the cows come home. But the total taxation level
Yeah.
in the United States
Yeah.
is, depending on which numbers you look at and which study, but I'm going to quote things that are coming from pretty conservative, not left-wing liberal,
Right.
but we're
Like The
30
Economist.
the 30th out of the 30 most industrialized nations of the world. We're 30th.
Yeah.
That's total. That's federal, state, and local, everything combined. If you look at, there's a tax foundation, and they look at it. Atlantic Magazine printed an article recently from the Tax Policy Center. They took the top 34 and were 31st out of 34 most industrialized nations of the world. And I would venture to say that there are very few places below us that any American would really want to live for any length of time.
Okay.
And so the idea that we're overtaxed, that talk radio hosts, that people in my business make these wild statements, we all know we're overtaxed. Well, if I was on the radio and the TV telling people that they were way overpaid, let's turn it on a personal level. You're way overpaid. Well, wouldn't you say, no, I'm not, compared to, you know, the market out there? That's
Okay.
the way we always look at it. The relativity of pays, the relativity of car prices.
Yeah.
If you were Rip Van Winkle and you awoke from 30 years sleep,
Yeah.
and you looked at a car price, you would say, oh my God, that's how much I paid for my house 30 years ago. And you would be right.
Right.
But it's all relative.
Right.
And I love this idea, well then, if we're overtaxed, you're overpaid. And your
Right.
argument is going to be compared to the people who do my job in similar markets, like teachers, we evaluate that, police officers, firefighters, how are they paid relative to others? If you take that same position,
Yeah.
you're going to defend your pay that, by
Right.
God, I deserve this pay compared to other people doing my job. I might even argue that police and fire and a lot of government officials deserve more, but the taxes are only this level. And if you look at that level of taxation, and you also add another factor,
Okay.
and it's the second myth that goes along with the first, that we are second only to Israel in the percentage of our budget, federal budget, that goes to our military and,
Okay.
and our defense.
Right.
And we are sort of the police power of the world. We're helping to police the world. And whether that's
Right.
right or wrong is immaterial. There's a huge amount of the federal government budget coming out. If you take that out and you say, here's what we're left with to govern, we are absolutely, and there's nobody out there, I don't care what right-wing Tea Party person you are, that could say that we aren't the most efficient and effective government on the face of the earth. Are we perfect? No,
No.
we're not perfect.
No.
There's nowhere to get to perfect. Somebody in a mass of 30,000 people that work for the state is going to do something stupid, just like they do in corporate America.
Right.
And they steal money or they do something bad that's wrong. I mean, I had 2 police officers selling drugs out of a police car.
Oh, my
Is there
gosh.
anybody that would think that I condone that or
Right.
It's just they, on their time, started this. They thought this was a great thing and they made a little money. We disciplined, we fired them, we went through the process. But my only point is, if you shop and you look around and you've looked at every automobile, you've looked at every trash can,
Right.
and you find this trash can that's at this level, yeah, there might be a lower one here. You know, I always joke around about, you know, Ethiopia or someplace. Yeah,
Right.
they have dirt streets and they have no drinking water and no safe drinking water, no sewers.
Right.
There's a place below us.
Right.
But if you look at the place you'd want to live and you apply that common sense logic,
Right.
how much am I paying compared to others? And everyone can go on the Forbes magazine has a description called the misery index.
Right.
Because we all hate paying taxes, and I
Right.
get that. But theirs shows 30th out of I think theirs is 24 out of the top 25. So it's a real easy thing for people to go on and look at, and then we ought to be honest with ourselves. How can we improve? And most importantly, where do we really want to be relative to our competitors? Because what our competitors are doing is building infrastructure, high-speed trains, and a whole host of things that save the environment, dealing with issues like investment in infrastructure, the bridges and the highways to get our people to work and get products to market, vitally important. We're way down the list on that investment factor. And then there's another one. And I know that you're going to ask questions about the future. But the most significant difference in today's world, I would suggest, I would say 25 years ago, but absolutely in the future, is the level of education that our young people attain.
Now, let me ask you this question. It's, dare we say, fashionable amongst big city mayors to say, give me the schools, let me do them. Have you ever gone down that path here in Akron? And if not, why not?
Well, I've threatened to do that in a State of the City speech, which was the most controversial, and I had everybody weighing in on both sides. I made the statement because I was
Frustrated?
furious is a better way of saying it.
Okay.
Frustrated is definitely there. I think the teachers, in fact, just to begin this answer, I think I can quote my written statement that teachers, the vast majority of whom are very hardworking, dedicated people, must be as frustrated as I am that the results of their hard work
Yeah.
isn't apparent.
Right.
And the way we measure is one of the difficulties. If you think of the wealthiest community in our county, Hudson, let's just say,
Okay.
or Bexley in Franklin County, and you compare an inner city teacher in Cleveland or Akron or Columbus, and you honestly can sit and tell me that you think the kindergarten teacher in Hudson or in Bexley is working as hard as the kindergarten teacher in Akron, then you haven't
Right.
lived on this planet
Right.
for a while.
And you've not been in those classrooms.
You haven't been in those classrooms. And so when we measure third grade production
Okay.
by what they spit back on a test, we know that it's almost 100% across the country a matter by zip code of what their income level is.
Okay, so then let me ask you this question. There's a strong link between, especially for those coming at this from a lower wealth index, the poor, that there's a issue here that relates also to human services and the whole support network you get out of human services. Many mayors talk about taking over the education, and you can do a good job of keeping the kids on track until they get to be junior high, and then, as they say, it's not my statement, the street takes them. So my question for you then is, all right, no mayor has ever called for taking over human services within their city, taking it away from the county. So my question is, the two are, okay, if you're out of Hudson, human services and education, those are two separate universes. They have almost no overlap. You talk about education and human services in a community that has 60% free and reduced lunch, then you are talking about overlap. You're talking about kids who may transfer schools 5 times in a year because mom keeps moving in front of the landlord. But we never talk about that interconnection. Do you have any insight as to why? I mean, you may not have the answer. I'm just wanting to know, have you thought about this, and has other people that you talk to thought about this, and do you have any suggestions as to what more we should even think about with this?
Well, our standard sort of answer, and I have been critical of the teachers, in particular a couple teachers union officials that I have dealt with in the past, because they use it as a crutch to say, well, Johnny or Susie,
Right.
their parents
Right.
aren't involved.
Right.
Well, Johnny and Susie didn't pick their parents.
Right.
So if we look at this in another way and say, they didn't pick their parents, but if we don't do something as a society, and I'm not some left-wing person that wants to let criminals out.
Actually, you're mirroring very closely some very conservative Republican school superintendents I've talked to on this.
Right. They are going to end up in a wrong place where they break in our houses and do
Right.
bad things and sell drugs.
Right.
If we don't figure out a way, and I've given this speech when I was Conference of Mayors president, I did a lot of national speaking, and I know that in Cleveland, I probably spoke to 350 or 400 business people. And I said, one of the problems of the education system is that you folks have allowed the left-wing liberals to control for many years all of the decisions made about schools.
Okay.
But their emphasis, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase this, is that we believe that every child should have their opportunity to meet their God-given destination and make something of themselves, sort of as the. And I happen personally to believe that because I think we're all here to kind of help everyone in this world that we all live in, shrinking world, where we're all sort of interconnected more so than a flat. The world is flat sort of concept. We're coming closer together and all those things. But I said to business people, you don't have to accept that left-wing thing. Here's what I would say to you. These are worker bees. You know that worker bees need to be trained how to work, and if you don't train them, they can't work.
Right.
Now, if that's not the most conservative view of this, so what's the missing link? Well, it's how do we get to them? How do we actually educate them? How do we make up for the fact that they were born into this family where the father might have been shot in a drug deal and the mother's on cocaine? I can be up and preach all I want to, and I got in an argument with a so-called expert from the academic world at the University of Akron. You can stand up there and preach all you want to. Why should that child that didn't pick to come into this world with two bad parents or parents who aren't there? I got this firsthand, and I will just share a short personal. My dad did all his fatherly duties. He was 49 when he died of a heart attack. I was 22. He had taken me to football practice, supported me, was home every night, was a tough cookie in terms of discipline. But my 12-year-old kid sister would not have thought at 12, 13, 14, or 15 that this was an ideal father. Why? Because he left her in a way that was totally, he went to work every day, the last day of his, last 4 years of his life without a vacation. So I don't want any conservative, right-wing, whatever nutcase telling me that my father wasn't doing everything in an all-American way, last 4 years without a vacation. He was the most hardest working and honest person, treasurer at the church. He did everything right. He died of a heart attack. So if you think of people who get in accidents, all the things that happen in one's family situation where you have individuals that are affected, I was fortunate to have two parents home almost every night of my life taking care of me. But how many people in today's world have that? Mothers are working two jobs because the husband left and disappeared or died. My mother had to go back to work. And I told teachers, you don't want to say anything about my kid's sister Denise that she was one of those kids because her mom and dad didn't go to PTA or bake cookies. My mom went back to work. So there's things that we want to blame, and it's easier to slough off, well, those are lazy people and they don't care. No, these kids are the same kids that have existed throughout history, and every society that's sustained itself and been successful has figured out what do they need to survive. And I joke around, hey, how many of you picked your parents? Because I must have been asleep. And how many of you wish for the good old days? When we went back to fathers taught their sons how to fish, hunt, or farm, and maybe defend themselves with an arrow or a stick or something. And mothers taught their daughters how to cook and care for kids. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But that's the level of education that they needed back then, 1,000 years ago. Today's world, and that's the missing part of this that I'm going to say is a solution. I heard one of the best, most thought-provoking speeches that I've ever heard from an older gentleman. His last name was Arkoff. And what he said that everyone, individually, collectively, companies, tend to identify a problem, and they call it an engineering problem, or a financial problem, or a marketing problem, or a manufacturing problem. And sometimes the solution to something isn't fit in that little box that we say, oh, let's go talk to the finance people. You look at the bigger picture. Here's how I would rephrase what you said earlier, and I believe you're right. And I say it a little different way. As Johnny and Susie go through school, we can impact them on the lower level and really have an impact on their lives in terms of the things that we can do within the schools. That's why we have after-school program, one of the top 10 successful school programs in our community learning centers that I had to fight for 28 years to get the school board to allow us to get our own kids back in those schools or keep them there in the evening. We can show by a study independently done by Kent State that the kids who are at risk are outperforming the higher level performing kids when the school year starts. So we know that helps them. But Johnny and Susie, about 13 or 14, when you say the streets get them, what I suggest is they're a lot smarter than what we give them credit for. Because what we do is we have people that are dressed up and we go in and we preach to them. Johnny, Susie, you can be anything you want to be. And Johnny or Susie are looking at, and I won't use the words that they use at 14, but there's, are you kidding me? You're not talking to me. My dad was shot in a drug deal and my mom's on crack. What we need to say to Johnny and Susie, no, for real, you are now, because our society, our elders, our people that are adults have stepped up to do what our society has done in the past, which is ratchet up the level of education that we know is required to get a job. No, Johnny and Susie, you can be anything you want. You have the same opportunity that a Hudson gets by birth, Hudson child by birth, birthright, because their father's going to write a check to go to Harvard or anywhere else. You have a chance to go to a university, to a trade school, to be a barber, to be an electrician, to be a plumber, to be a nuclear scientist, to go to a four-year college or something less. And until we do that, we're going to have kids falling by the wayside, knowing that we're telling them that they should have hope, but there's no real opportunity in today's world for a kid that graduates from high school. We've been really lying to kids for the last 25 years. And let me go through a progression here because it helps show the leadership of Akron, and I'll make the joke that everybody uses. I was not mayor back then, but in 1847, this city, a preacher and a developer, home builder, came together and had an idea that they should open up we should open up a school collectively and teach kids to read and write. And so in 1847, we developed, in the city of Akron, the first public school system that taxed everybody, elected a school board, and then hired teachers. And those two people were pursued by mobs of several different evenings to try to lynch them because they basically, what do you mean I have to pay taxes for somebody else's kid? My kid's doing fine. Yeah, but a lot of the poor kids weren't. So we recognized the need to do one thing. We didn't say give them a college education. We didn't say high school. To learn to read and write. In the late 1890s, we were one of the first communities to provide a free high school education. Now, did it cost tax money? Yes, it did. Both of those major leaps. But it was adults sitting at the table and saying, what do our kids need for the future? Instead of saying, hey, it's mine, I'm not giving up anything, I don't care, I'm going to take care of me. The greed in this society, we're the wealthiest society in the face of this world that we live in, and here we are, people who look like me, instead of coughing up a little more so that we can bet on the future, we can plan for the future, we can prepare kids for the future. And you can argue with me, well, that's terrible. We never paid for college education in the past. Well, before 1847, we didn't pay to read and write. Before 1898 or whatever, we didn't pay for high school education. But for 100 years, we've set that level. Here's what it was. Here's what it was, 1898. For over 100 years, we've been paying for high school education. We need to come up with the amount of money it takes, make it efficient and effective, and I have an idea that our system is doing that. We have started that early college program, and they are now, thanks to Dave James' leadership and really pushing people, they are doing in each one of our high schools now, and we need to expand it, but the opportunity to get real certified, accredited college credit for taking classes within your own high school, which gives Johnny and Susie some confidence. In our day, not maybe to say that you're as old as I am, but back in the day,
I think we're about the same peer group.
They called it advanced placement. You could take an AP math class. Well, so you got a 5.8, but what did that do for you? How about if you got 4 hours of credit for that in college that you didn't have to pay for? So,
and you know, you've hit upon something, which is the cultural aspect of this, which is the recent studies have come out and said that students from modest economic backgrounds, when they go to college, they have a high failure rate because they're simply not used to the culture of it. And back home, my wife and I were amongst the very rare people who actually gone to a 4-year degree, gotten our degrees, and the young people during the summer would come over, have a cup of have a cup of Pepsi or Coca-Cola with us, and they'd ask us, so what's college really like? Because they had nobody in their family, and I'd say, you make the phone call, pizza shows up at the door. And they go, no, and I go, yeah, it's so cool, and they go, wow. But that's the type of stuff we're talking about, and it's, if you have family members who've already been off to college, it's easier, and the other thing we're finding is that there's almost like a lack of confidence, like you alluded to here. We have a whole lot of children from low-income backgrounds, relatively modest backgrounds, who could go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, Brown, but nobody ever tells them to do that. You're waving your head. Yeah, you had the same thing.
I am a product of a good home, not wealthy, but not poor, middle income, rubber workers family.
Right.
And I literally, because my football, but also I had decent grades and scored well enough that I was accepted at Columbia and Brown.
Right.
Recruited by Yale and every Ivy League school. And I can tell you, I would never have admitted it probably until I was over about 50, but I was intimidated by rich people.
Yes.
All I kept thinking was, I'm going to be the outcast. I'm going to be looking for 19 cents for a hamburger, because for the young people out there, that's what McDonald's hamburger was back then, 19 cents.
Yeah.
And all of my wealthy teammates are going out to eat steak every night. And I can tell you, it affected me.
Right.
I shut down. I applied, but I shut that off because
mentally,
because I had this fear.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not African American.
Right.
I'm not from an area where there were drugs and criminals and things that people think of. I was a typical middle American child growing up in a normal area that had none of the other things that people associate with lower income and hang-ups and other problems where no one's gone to college. It's just the fact is there's a psychological barrier that I see in my own. There are these things that happen in my own life that I can extrapolate from. I don't have the experience of being poor and black. My parents were home, all of those things, but I still had that hang-up. And it still exists now in places like golf courses.
Right.
There is an little group of golf courses, and you walk in. I don't care who you are.
Do you own golf shoes or not?
There's a book that Bishop Johnson has shared with us about this whole psychology of being poor and growing up and not knowing when you see three forks there, and you're intimidated by things. And I want to finish with one last thing. I won't mention her name, but if I did, the people in Akron would be shocked to learn that when we started talking about this and we now have at our community learning centers, we have Stark State coming in, providing in our own neighborhoods at middle schools, classes that are accredited classes for our people to take, and it's in their neighborhood, they pull right up, they're more familiar, and so they get over the barrier. Let them take a few classes to know they can do the work. And when I talked to her about it, and if I mention her name, a lot of people in Akron who know this person would say, I can't believe it, because she is considered to be an intellectual, sophisticated, she's into art and things that you would just assume that, but she grew up in a rubber workers family. She did not go to college right out of high school because she admitted to me, she said, I was intimidated. Just to go, and Akron U's campus wasn't all that great back then. But I was intimidated to go to Akron U's campus. As a high school senior looking at it, I didn't go to college right away. And if the two of us, have that kind of mentality, then that a kid that's never had anyone in his family ever talk about college, or even maybe in some schools where they don't even encourage kids to think about college, that's a real hang-up and difficulty in our society.
Let me do something I'm not supposed to do. I'm not supposed to propose policy in this show, but let me throw something at you. Talk to Dr. James about taking his program, the next step, which is identifying prominent members of the Akron community who went to maybe Columbia, maybe Yale, maybe Dartmouth, maybe Ohio State, maybe Miami University, and just start up a informal mentorship program, maybe just 3 lunches a year, where they just sit down with these kids who are thinking about going to, Mother Miami or the Ohio State University or OU. It's just way down in Athens, and oh my gosh, how can we get there? And how to, and just talk them through some of this stuff.
Well, I mean, I think that's a great idea. In a way, they're doing it. They have a business council and they do some of the things. But I don't want to, there's a huge gap right now between where we are, today's world, and where we need to be, in my opinion. And that is, there still is this factor that when the guy brought your pizza that you called for, he actually asked for money to get paid for the pizza.
Right.
So kids have to afford, and mostly that's telling a bunch of kids who do not have a lot of background in dealing with bureaucracy. Oh yeah, you fill out these forms and you get your parents to sign this and you do this and then you get this loan and then you got $130,000 worth of loans after you graduate. There's a problem, there's a disconnect there, but I do think the more we can get young people to go through a process of trying in their own comfortable settings, so they know they can do the work. Now that, if you were 40 years old and you've been through college and you say, I'm going to move to Austin, Texas for my new job, you have a lot of moving and relocating and that. You still have a lot of those hang-ups. This is more about whether they can do the work, and that needs to be sort of put out of their mind. They need to have confidence, and I think you do that in familiar surroundings. What we need is to, and I thought this is where you were going, because I think in the past Cleveland State has done a good job of marketing this, and it is this to a different level of the people who are going to go to MIT and Harvard or whatever. You also need to get young people to know that if they take 3 or 4 classes, they can be an electrician or they can do something in their life that pays more. I always joke around that my brother-in-law was a steel worker. He got, after 3rd generation, after being laid off 3 times, he said, this might not work for me. Went back out, took several classes at Stark State, became an electrician, and he now makes more money than I do. Probably has a much more enjoyable life because he doesn't have to go out on the circuit every night of the week.
He can go to the grocery store and just get his groceries.
Go to a game and watch the game instead of having to talk. But this idea that if I can do it, you can do it. That concept is vitally important to what you just said about the mentoring. Look at me. I know I look old and I look like I'm a business guy or whatever, but I grew up in a family.
You're just a son of a rubber worker.
Same way.
Let me ask you this question then. All right, we've talked a lot about, and we've also talked about some problems, but also some solutions that you're doing here too. But what keeps you up at night? Is there just something that just, you just lay there and go, oh man, we got to fix the blah, 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 we got to do the blah, 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 blah. What keeps you up at night as being mayor of the city?
Well, it is the exact issue that we talked about, and that is, I put an issue before the public here in Akron, and it was a concept that was not first tried here. Cleveland and many cities sold off underutilized assets or things like parking decks, the things that they could monetize. And then use the money for something else.
Like the governor did with the Turnpike recently.
There you go. My argument with some of those has always been, what do you do with the money? And to just fritter it away for the present. So I dealt with this years ago when we were going to expand our landfill and sell it to a private landfill operator. The EPA was actually encouraging us to do that. And I said, land is a non-replenishable asset. There's certain things that are replenishable, there's some that aren't. And I would argue oil and the thing that the governor proposed to increase to get us up to at least the mid-level of other states, and then use that money for long-term investment, which I would suggest is education. Because what I was looking at was we were going to have $10.5 million, and I was going to put it in a scholarship fund for kids that graduate from Akron schools. That didn't work out because of the EPA requirements for soil conditions. It just didn't work out. So I kept agonizing. I've been working on this, thinking about how can we come up with a pot of money. I put on an issue. The rabble-rousers convinced people that we were, well, it's 2 people here who are obsessed with becoming mayor, who absolutely, totally lied to the public by saying that by us leasing our sewer system, the treatment facility, which is downriver from where we take our water, that we would be ruining our drinking water. Well, we take our water up at Lake Rockwell, up in Portage County. It runs downhill. and the river, and then we dump our sewage at the lowest point. I don't know
Right.
of any place in the world that they do something opposite. You don't
Right.
take your water from the low point and pump your sewage up.
No, I'm not aware of anybody. The
But-
Romans fixed that about 2,000 years ago.
But they also teamed up with the AFSCME union. The president said to me, Mayor, you have to understand this is such a great idea. We have to kill it, help it kill it here, because every mayor in the country will want to do this. And I tell people, when you're lying in bed tonight, put the first part of that and the last part together and see what goes between. This is such a great idea. We have to kill it.
Yeah.
And figure that one out. But I committed all 100 people in that sewer system that they would keep their job with the city, because we lose about 35 a year, and you know some of the jobs are similar. Maintenance people and the people who are out fixing sewer lines could fix water lines. And we were anticipating, and we had top national companies look at this to evaluate, and anticipating anywhere from 280 to 300 million that we would net out of this after we paid off our debt
Debts.
service, debts. And we were going to place that, 100% of that, in the Akron Community Foundation to manage the funds, and use
Oh.
the interest to pay for a free college education
Okay.
for every child who graduated from an Akron high school.
You know, you're the second, because just a couple of days ago, I was talking to Tom Humphreys down at the Youngstown Warren Regional Chamber of Commerce, and a few years back, they had a not dissimilar program to go ahead and do some school consolidation, just the back office operations, I should say. No one's going to go out and shoot the mascot. And they're going to do much the same thing. This is people respond very well to this.
Our voters turned it down.
Yeah.
The national union president was in here, I think, 3 times, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars handing out street money and having people in T-shirts.
You're a
run around.
Democrat. I thought all Democrats, and you, I'm teasing you a little
Yeah,
bit here.
I understand. And here's where, you know, the situation that I described it as a real-life situation. And I've had people come up and say, you know, boy, I was just totally led to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah.
You know, would you think about putting that back on the ballot? But the 100 employees that we have within the sewer system
Yeah.
had 113
Okay.
kids, all of whom
Would have qualified.
would have qualified for a free college education. And I honestly don't know how they could look at themselves in the mirror to
Yeah.
say, you know, my job, even though I could have another job
Right.
repairing a water line over here, and
Right.
I now repair a sewer line.
Yeah.
I don't know how they look themselves in the mirror. My guess is that there were a lot of wives, because the majority are males. I got to believe somewhere along the line there are a lot of wives who said, what in the hell were
are
you
you
thinking?
thinking?
This would have been good for the future of our young people. And as I tell people,
Yeah.
my kids both have master's degrees.
Right.
They're each have 3 kids. My grandkids are going to be fine.
Right.
It's not looking out for the people who are doing fine now. It's for those other kids. And there's one last factor that I always remember
Okay.
to mention. If you're poor and you help if with assistance in the schools, and you get through that maze in your life of being poor and living in maybe not so
Right.
great a neighborhood, and you actually get decent grades, which is the exception rather than a rule, you have a lot of federal help right now.
Yeah.
If you, and your parents don't make anything
Right.
or make very little. If you're rich, your daddy's gonna write the check anyway.
Right.
But the middle income people, the
Right.
cops, the firefighters, the teachers, all of those working class people
what we used
are
to
the
call blue
ones.
collar.
The blue collar and the
Pink
gray.
collar.
Right, pink collar, I'm not sure what the term is. But for the mid-level people who aren't wealthy, this would have impacted their lives in such a significant way. And I believe, and there's proof, that when you give that 13, 14-year-old young
Hope.
person hope and opportunity. Don't
Right.
forget, selling hope is we can do that.
Right.
You can do it. Johnny, you can be. This is America. You can be some. But you don't have really opportunity because you tell them they got to take out a $140,000 loan.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids go to work at McDonald's and then they go do
Right.
something else. But when we have real opportunity, Kalamazoo did this
I know.
through 3 major funding sources, each of which came from their industrialists that had that had started companies and were successful. And I tell people, there are Firestone family members around, but none of them live in Akron.
Yeah.
You know, one of them drives a race car, and one of them has a winery, but getting them to
Shows up on The Bachelor.
yeah, that's right. But to try to get one of them to write a $50 million check is just not going to happen.
Right.
And what I had lined up was the business community weighing in with donations to follow up with this, to make sure this was always funded for as long as Akron was different than the rest of the state. My guess is that just as leaders in 1847 around the country copied Akron, and just as leaders copied the public school system. In fact, that was called the Akron Plan, by the way. Like seven school board members, and it's virtually everywhere in the country.
It's pretty much untouched then, yeah.
That in 1898, other communities started to say, maybe we ought to offer our kids a 12-year education. That somewhere down the road, and it's an absolute prediction that is going to happen unless we get taken over by some country. There's 32
the Canadians.
Of them. Well, there's 32 of them now that are paying for college education for their students. 32 other countries. And here we are lagging behind, telling everybody we're the greatest country in the world, and we can't be in the future if our kids don't have that technology and understanding of technology and the education they need to prosper.
This conversation reminded me a lot of the work of Ruby Payne. We'll leave that one go for a moment here. 2014 is an interesting year in Ohio because we have rumor is we have a gubernatorial election coming up. And if you could tell, whoever wins in 2014, what they should have as their number one plank, their number one issue, their top priority in 2015, what would you suggest that would be? If you had to pick one thing, and I think it'd be hard for you to stop at one, Mayor, but could you pick one thing?
Well, I'm going to do a process of elimination and say that we're already the 27th in terms of 50 states of taxation. So giving another tax break to people who really don't need an extra $300 or $400. I mean, really, $300 a year is not going to make a difference in my life in any way whatsoever. That's definitely not it. It's definitely not turning our back on the problems of today, because we need to deal with those. But it is in a way that every successful society has done, and that is to say, what do we need to do to prepare our young people for the future? Because that's the future. And I get so tired of people claiming that they're the education president, and the education mayor, and the education governor, and not looking at education. And I'm not asking that this next governor say, I didn't say, I want you to go in and fix the high schools and the public school system, because those things are a matter of continually tweaking and fixing little by little. There are so many societal problems that they have to help fix while they're trying to teach kids. So I'm not suggesting the governor can do a major effort in suddenly recreating our public school system and fixing them. And I don't know that charter schools, fixing them or not fixing them or doing everything, will have the impact, dramatic impact on the future, as much as stepping up and saying, let's have a group of people who are honest.
This reminds me of the Miss America contest. We've had the fourth runner-up, the third runner-up.
I'm getting to that, which is, let's say, what do our kids need to get a job in today's world? I don't care to categorize it that way. I don't do it in my own life. I tell people, if I could push a button, and I couldn't bring back like my favorite president of all time or something or other, in realistic terms, in my lifetime, I bring back Richard Nixon as president, and I bring back Governor Rhodes. And I know that it's
somewhat surprising, but go ahead.
Both of them understood the local level and how the importance of dealing with issues, the importance of their role. Nixon started revenue sharing. He said, the Northwest might be down and the Southeast might be up. So let's level that out and help people do some things. He started EPA, but when he said, Mayor, you have a $300 million problem with your water system. Here's a check for $220 million to help
offset it.
Because he understood paying for it. If the next governor, and I want to say this, I don't know who's going to win, and whatever's going to happen, I can't predict the future.
If you could,
but in the second term, of any person, when their term limit 8 years, in my opinion, it's a gift almost. That, and they have a responsibility to use the political capital they have and they've earned by getting elected a second time to move the ball forward in a major significant way. Not to plan for whatever appeasement and telling people what I need to know or what
Okay.
they want to hear,
Okay.
just so I can get another job somewhere. It is to move forward. And if I would do one thing, I would say, Governor, whoever you are, this is January 2015. Look at what it is that young people need to get a job in the future and match up those resources in the most efficient and effective way as you can to be able to carry that out. And if it's 2-year college degree, if it's 4-year, if it's a plumber's license, help those young people get that just as our forefathers did. And that I would define as leadership, and that will define you as a great governor. That's what I would say too.
Well, I would love to close on this note because that was very, very uplifting, but I would like to ask you this question. We're doing this, what do Buckeyes read? Okay, so the question for you is, have you read or written any great books lately? Or has there been a book that you've read in the past that has had still the most amount of influence on you and how you govern the city?
Well, it's sort of a combination. I have loved reading just about anything that McCullough writes.
Oh, yeah.
Anything that is historical, that you get an understanding of how something happened and the details, the nuances, the intricacies of how the system, worked and operated and how somebody worked within that system to
Right.
accomplish something. So whether it's, whether books about Lincoln and Truman, I've obviously thought of as
Right.
one
You've
of my
read
real heroes.
you've read Truman's McCullough
Yeah.
book when it came out a few years back. Yeah.
The Gang of Rivals,
Right.
fascinating. I don't know that in today's world that people have the character of commitment that
Right.
they had back then. If somebody, we have people that are so opportunistic and they're so set in their own political ambition that I don't know that could be accomplished. I mean, I know Obama hired Hillary, and I think that worked out pretty well, crossing the aisle and doing that in a major way. I'm not sure, but it was fascinating just looking at all of those things. I have the most recent book that I read, and I'm almost finished, is really more of a manual in a way, but it's about smart cities and the concept that has developed that on the surface you immediately think of high tech. Everything is
Right.
high tech and managed.
Right.
The smart cities could be described as high tech cities or expensive technology cities. No, it's smart cities, and smart actually it means that you need to bring some common sense.
Okay.
And it's not just about spending money on technology, and it's finding that right balance between use of technology that absolutely helps and makes life better, but it begins with thinking about people and people-sized, like downtowns. It's not
Right.
some big, massive, cold building.
Right.
Like the Renaissance Center in Detroit.
Right. Which has
It's-
not worked out, shall we
It's
say.
looking at what Milwaukee did and people in the industry that knew and understood that people want to be in quality,
Human-sized.
human-sized, human sort of sized and comfortable feelings and design. And it started out that way, and then add the component of technology. And it's a growing field of study and of expertise. And I'm sorry I'm not remembering the author, but he spoke in Barcelona at a Smart Cities conference I attended in November. And I was asked to speak 3 years ago,
Yeah.
2 years ago, and then last year I didn't attend. But it's really a great sort of training your mind to think of both the people that are important in the system, and then how do you add technology without overwhelming people with
Right.
technology,
Right.
or without using technology when it's
Yeah.
appropriate. And it's a fine line. But
Yeah.
I would suggest we're talking about a Jane Jacobs was a very
Oh,
active
yeah. Yeah.
urbanist is what we
Right.
would call her now. And her common sense approach to bring balance to cities and still have green space, walkable areas.
She's versus Robert Moses was a battle for the ages for the Titans.
That's exactly right. So you know that in New York City. And that's what she brought, I think, was that common sense. It's not to say that you can't have skyscrapers or higher buildings, but you do it in a way that adds extra green space and do things that are people-spaced especially on the street level. So I think in a way of city development, smart city, which includes everything from garbage pickup to our transportation system, I think it's a concept that I've sort of grasped to kind of look at the way we do business here. And, I will throw this out. Everybody thinks technology solves a lot of problems. One, we have a new technology that's not so new, but that we implemented a number of years ago, a long time ago, 911. And it is a better system.
Okay.
But we have more people working there now than we did when we had the two manual systems, the fire department and the police department running their own. And normally you think of technology cutting manpower. But to staff it, now, we got a lot more calls because people can easily call 911. I wonder how many calls that people didn't make because they couldn't remember, which is now added 330, but 375-2181 or 2101, depending on where you were calling, and you had to look it up in the phone book. I wonder how many situations we didn't get a call because of that, and then you had EMS, which we didn't have back in the early days. But it's a wonderful book to force you to think about how you balance life and how you balance city development.
It reminds me that I think IBM has also done a series of smart cities. I think what you're talking about is also very closely relational to that too.
Of course, theirs is more inclined to sell more technology.
That's true.
Green space maybe, but that's okay. They have good technology.
I'll go back to for those of you who, like me, when you read a big, thick book, your lips hurt and sound out all the big words. There was a wonderful center section in The Economist magazine, maybe 2 years ago, all about cities are the drivers of the future innovation. I mean, it's people are inventing this stuff, and it's this, think about the millennials are all choosing to come back to the cities, and one of the things we're seeing with that is they drive 25%, a whole quarter less than their previous peer group did. That's going to have implications. Okay, so for the cities, you're going to see them moving back into cities. It's going to decimate the Ohio Department of Transportation because it's a gasoline tax, and they're burning less gasoline, and they're driving hybrids. So all of a sudden, so you get all of these things going on in society. It's all very much interrelated. But
can I add?
Sure, we can't stop you.
Well, to tie that back in,
we can't stop you.
Think about it. I talked about tax policy, but if you look at where we talk about Ohio, we've tried to deal with here. We brought Rebecca Ryan in talking about young professionals. We're all talking about brain drain that people. But one of the things that Rebecca Ryan, an expert in the young professional field, has said, and I could have jumped up and kissed her, and I never saw her before, or met her, or hardly knew anything about her before the chamber brought her as a speaker. But she said, I want to tell you something. The young professionals are moving to places that are the highest taxed in our country. Let me repeat that. And she repeated it. And the third time she repeated it, people got uncomfortable. But the fact is, younger generation, they want to know the quality of life. And you don't get there by being North Mississippi. The lowest tax. You just don't. There are quality of life issues, transportation, the other things. And that's really, I think, most important for people to understand. Where do the people who can make a choice want to be? And that's an important factor. And you want the quality of life. And I have to add one other thing, because there will be people who will listen here and they say, oh, he's a Democrat, he's a left-wing big spender. I run the city with 1,750 employees. When my good friend, the last Republican who sat in my chair, Roy Ray, was in the mayor's office, he had 3,400 full-time employees. We have more calls for service for police. We have EMS added, that has gone up exponentially in number of calls. So I'm managing this city with 1,750, approximately 50% of what he had available. We also, as another factor, receive each and every year from the state with the local government cut,
Right.
which I despise Governor Casey, first governor to really implement a major cut in that program since 1934,
Okay.
because it was a handshake deal with local communities. Help us get this passed, and we'll share the revenue. Started out at 40%. The last time it was fully funded, it was about 3.65% of the state budget.
Okay.
That cut, but total that with the other cuts in the federal support.
Okay.
I'm running the city in 1981 value dollars with $34.5 million less money
Yeah.
than what Roy had.
Right.
Now, anyone out there can probably convert that, and I would argue it would be at least 50 million. If
Yeah.
I had $50 million of resources, we would be sitting on top of the world, given the situation we are now in, to be able to hire people that we really need in certain positions. So I don't take a backseat to anybody when they say, well, we should run government more like a business. Yeah, and you know what? I believed in that, and I want to give you a philosophical part of this. And I have my own party folks who argue with me. But I happen to believe that it is a more liberal position, and as you know, the liberal and
Right.
conservative, I mean, you can't even keep track of it.
I know.
But I believe that the more liberal position, if you think liberals care about everybody and the poor and the disenfranchised and, you know, handicapped people and elderly people, then they tend to draft programs to deal with those individuals who need more services. And an elderly person and a senior or a handicapped person normally need more services. Poor people need more. There's more
Right.
crime and other things. So if those folks that I care about and others care about need more help, and you have a government that's supposed to do things for people that they can't do for themselves, and we have limited resources, then the more efficient and effective that I am at running that government,
Yeah.
the more each one of those people who need our help get more help. Because if I waste it,
Right.
there's less resources to provide help. I happen to think my philosophy about running government in a most efficient and effective manner with the
Right.
lowest taxes, but still
Right.
saying to people, we need taxes times to be able to do things, that is a true, more liberal view than the real
Right.
liberals of the 60s who said, oh, it's just federal dollars, who
Right.
cares?
Right.
We can waste it on these programs.
You know what this reminds me of is there's been 4 bills introduced in the General Assembly, House Bill 321, 322, 323, 324, that set up, a data structure with uniform chart of accounts from like the accountants talk about. Mayor, you very well may run the leanest, most effective city in Ohio, but it's almost impossible to prove because we have no real data. The only thing we have is me having spent the past 10 years, I joke about what I've been doing. It's kind of like running statewide, but very slowly, you know.
Who would want to do that, by the way?
But very slowly too, yes. But, great food though. I can tell you where all the great food is anywhere in Ohio. But the point is the fact that I can tell you that Akron is doing better than its peer groups, but I can't give you data to back that up. I can tell you I see more people on the streets. I have more trouble finding a parking spot here than I do in any other city, except for Columbus. So my point is the fact that you're doing some things right, but what I would encourage you to do here, look at those 4 bills. Now have your lobbyists look at them, your advocates look at them, and go, these are things that could help you. And so then you can make the argument then to the governor's office and everybody else, say, look, we're already the leanest. Reward us for being the leanest machine.
Yeah.
And don't cut our gasoline anymore. In fact, give us, let us have some opportunity grants here and some stuff to do some more stuff.
Well, it's interesting because I talked to someone from Columbus just yesterday about this idea, and I've thrown this out to try to get to the governor. Using...
And his staff do watch this, by the way.
Well, and I've said this, to the governor personally, I don't have that many opportunities, but if I could make a suggestion, and I worked with Voinovich, I worked with Taft and his people, Bruce Johnson, Development Department. I've served more time as mayor with a Republican governor. And,
Yes.
And somebody ought to ask Voinovich right now what he thinks of our relationship.
Right.
I disagree with him on some things, but we had a great relationship. There's so many people that I've worked with across the aisle and in fact, I'm going to be able to do this. It's interesting for this show. There it is, right out of my pocket, and you can see it's beat
Oh,
up.
gosh.
I carry this along
My
with
congressman, John Boehner.
along with pictures of my grandkids.
Uh-huh.
But I do it to tell people, I knew John when he was down
right.
in the State House, and he was a regular guy.
Right.
Republicans and Democrats went to each other's fundraisers.
Yeah.
I think the position he's in now, and he finally stood up to his right wing, like I think our left wing needs to
He stood up to.
be
reined in.
challenged at various times. But sometimes the governor assumes that he knows everything, and he ought to take some advice from some people that have a legitimate track record of trying to make the system work.
Okay.
You know, Bruce Johnson once, when we were together, Taft's second, his first
Right.
choice was horrible, but Bruce Johnson's a great guy in economic development, said, boy, I wish you could come down and help me convince these guys that we need more resources and change. And I looked at him, I said, Bruce, last time I checked, those are all Republicans. He
Right.
said, yeah, I know, but I still could use some help. But
I can hear Bruce saying
I know.
this.
He's a great guy. I want to make the system work.
Right.
And when the governor is reelected or a new governor comes in, I hope they reach out to people who have done this on the front line and take
Yeah.
some advice. But, you know, here's one, and that is that the local government fund was not some political new program that somebody just came up with. It was a handshake deal with local communities in 1934.
Right.
Help us get this sales tax passed. They cut property taxes 40%. The Plain
Right.
Dealer did a wonderful job.
Right.
There's no newspaper, in my opinion, that's done anything close to that. But
Okay.
in one article of explaining it, it's just the average person doesn't know.
Right.
You talk about Obamacare, you talk about COPS program in Washington, you talk about these
Right.
acronyms that stand for various things. Public gets so much. Local government fund is not just a one person's deal. This was
Right.
a whole state.
Right.
If he wanted to make it more efficient, and
Yeah.
his goal is to make local government more efficient, by God, we got to do it.
Yeah.
Then what we ought to do is say, okay, I am going to take not the traditional and pass out to everybody, but I'm going to use this as an incentive, because in life, it's almost absolute, whether it's in our individual lives or our collective lives in organizations or businesses, that we don't always do the thing that makes sense, right or wrong, or,
Right.
or the best thing for the future, unless we have some incentive or a stick.
Right.
You know, they can have penalties.
Right.
But if you use local government fund to incentivize
Right.
mergers, if you incentivize consolidation, I've consolidated my building department, my health department,
Right.
weights and measures, we ought to be doing more of that, and I've got a suggestion for the future.
Right.
That is, every county that we would describe as an urbanized county,
Right.
that he should incentivize with a big pot of money
Okay.
the process that Louisville went through
Yes.
to have a metropolitan government
Right.
and put everybody literally in Lucas County in the same boat.
Right.
So they all know they're competing against the world rather than Maumee and Toledo battling and everybody.
Right.
Here, we could do that. We have a county executive.
Right.
But it's a different structure than trying
Right.
to put county government and make it a municipal government is kind of like taking a donkey and trying to make it a racehorse.
Right.
It's not, if they set up a different system
Right.
and let people come in and give an incentive for
Right.
that, he would change dramatically the face of these cities and counties battling against each other and make it truly
Yeah.
a future that Ohio could be proud of.
Two things. One, the current Ohio Constitution allows for what is called the strong charter. Here at Summit County actually has the weak charter. The strong charter is they assume duties of municipalities,
Right.
which is, I think, something I'm going to look at the camera and say, nobody knows this, maybe except for me, 500 people in Ohio. All right, I mean, that's about it. Okay, the second thing is, I'm not speaking for the administration, and they've never directly informed me of this, but I think they were quite surprised by the response because of the LGF. I sincerely believe, from talking to people who've talked to people, that they were expecting innovation, collaboration, sharing, and things like that. I think they were profoundly, and so what I want to go to, and we talk about that, that reminds me of one of my favorite little sayings is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, however you can salt the feed. And I think what you're calling for here is, full disclosure, I'm on the Local Government Innovation Council that heads up Local Government Innovation Fund, and I think what you're calling for here is in effect, that needs to be supercharged.
Supercharged, but it's a different way of looking at it. Rather than the small picture where we combine different,
One-offs, a series of one-offs. You're looking for an overall thematic change
leap
structure.
forward, major leap forward, and you do that by dangling a huge amount of incentive out there, which I'm talking about money, to be able to do a major project, to do something that the citizens say, wow, we can't turn this down. We saw this across the state.
Right.
And it wasn't done under Democrats' watch.
Right.
But the school funding.
Right.
First of all, it took Bill Moyer embarrassing us by doing the report that said we had the worst schools in the nation. I guarantee you, we would have had people saying, well, no, it must be Mississippi or something. To say that our state had the worst schools in the nation was such an embarrassment, being involved in national organizations. But what we did was we said, no, we're not going to do that little bit of here, this. We're going to go in a major way with this pot of money. And I know that there are a few places where the local match got turned down, but most people said, hey, we're getting this revenue from the state. One time we get one chance to do this in our lifetime. Let's move forward, and virtually everybody passed a tax increase to make the local share. If you had some kind of match program, had some incentive, and say, I'm going to do it because what I believe in. If he doesn't believe it, and he thinks that we ought to have 52 little burbs in Cleveland area and 42 in Akron area and Summit County and all that, then okay, then that's not a priority. But if it is, then incentivize it by putting the local government fund that you already have, that's already there, dedicated for local government, but say, I want efficient local government. I want effective local government.
And I think you may find those 4 bills then can help you measure, then you can also then measure the plots. Does this program, see, this is one of my frustrations right now. The 50 states are like Brandeis said, 50 living laboratories of democracy. Rhode Island does something, Massachusetts may copy it, Indiana does something, we may look at it. You're doing I can tell you my gut is you're doing some innovative things here, but it's hard to put the numbers to it and say, Dayton, here's their most effective program. You're at 85% higher than your peer group cost in these categories. Thank you very much. These are fun. And I've said this before, I would do this job for free, but my wife is a very reasonable person and will not let me work for free. So this is Gene Krebs, along with Mayor Don Plusquellic of Akron. And on behalf of the Center for Community Solutions, we're high in Ohio. Thank you. Tune in next week, and we'll see what interesting stories we have to tell then about this great state.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.